There's someone in the house who spends all day lying in bed, and it makes the entire place feel gloomy. It's really frustrating because she can't even take care of herself. I keep wondering how long this is going to continue. She just sleeps all the time. Whenever my mother-in-law and sister-in-law see me, they start complaining. They always have something to say. Drew, it doesn't matter if Mark has a wife or not since she doesn't do anything, they grumble. What's the point of having a wife if she can't even help out? Even my father-in-law joins in with them. Let me introduce myself. I'm Emily Brown and I'm 30 years old. My husband and I have been married for 5 years. Life hasn't been easy for me. My father passed away when I was in high school due to an illness, and not long after I got married, I lost my mother too. Since I was a kid, I've always loved drawing. My dream was to become an artist for children's books. After high school, I went to a design school, worked hard, and landed a job as an illustrator at a small design company. It was a job I truly loved. My husband, Mark, works for an advertising company, and we met when he visited my office to ask me to design a character for one of his projects. After dating for 2 years, we decided to get married. When we got married, we moved in with my in-laws because my sister-in-law was still living with them. It seemed like the best option at the time. I decided to leave my job and work as a freelancer, so I could manage both my career and the household duties. I wanted to be a good wife and took on most of the housework willingly. It wasn't too difficult because my mother-in-law didn't enjoy housework and was fine with me taking over. She even told me to do things my own way. My sister-in-law wasn't much help either. She was always out with friends or colleagues, rarely home for meals. Despite this, we all lived together peacefully without any major issues, at least at first. However, everything changed 3 years ago. I had a terrible accident. I fell down the stairs at a train station and suffered a serious spinal injury. This injury completely changed my life. I became paralyzed from the waist down. At first, the shock was unbearable. I couldn't believe that I would never walk again. Now, after 3 years, I've slowly learned to live with this reality, but it hasn't been easy. Initially, my in-laws were sympathetic and tried to help me as much as they could. But as time passed, their patience wore thin. I think they never imagined I'd be bedridden for the rest of my life. To make things more complicated, my sister-in-law got married 2 years ago and moved out. I think my in-laws thought her leaving would make things easier, but it didn't. Now, it feels like they're annoyed with me being here. I can sense their frustration whenever they look at me. Since the house is old and not designed for a wheelchair, I'm confined to my bed most of the time. I rely on a helper and a housekeeper to assist with my daily needs, like cleaning and laundry. They've been a big help, but it's not the same as having supportive family members. Even though I can no longer walk, I'm grateful that my upper body still works. Because of that, I've been able to continue working from home as an illustrator. My work gives me a sense of purpose and keeps me busy, which I'm thankful for. But things at home have become difficult. My husband, Mark, used to be so caring and kind after my accident. Now, he barely talks to me and doesn't help at all. My in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, have stopped assisting with anything related to my care. She always disliked housework, and now she's completely withdrawn from doing anything for me. My father-in-law, who recently retired, is home all the time, but even he doesn't bother helping. Helpers are supposed to provide physical assistance only if no able-bodied family members are available, but since my in-laws are both healthy and my husband works full-time, their involvement is limited. For the first 2 years after my accident, they helped a little here and there, but now they've stopped altogether. The atmosphere at home has grown cold. It feels like I'm a burden to everyone. I know they didn't expect to have someone bedridden living with them, and I understand that it's not easy for anyone. But what hurts the most is the emotional distance. My husband, the person I thought I could rely on, has completely checked out. It's as if he's given up on me. Every day, I try to stay positive. I focus on my work and remind myself that I'm lucky to still be able to do what I love. But deep down, it's painful to feel so alone in a house full of people. I've heard it all before. My husband always says, caring for someone isn't a man's job. That's the excuse he uses to avoid helping me. Meanwhile, my in-laws don't do anything for me either, but because of the rules, the helper isn't allowed to take on tasks that family members are supposed to handle. Still, the helper saw how tough my situation was and, feeling sorry for me, introduced me to a housekeeper who could help with my personal needs. At first, my in-laws weren't happy about the idea. They scoffed, saying, "What a waste of money. Why would you need a housekeeper? What kind of luxury are you trying to live in?" I tried to explain that I had no choice. "If no one does my laundry, I won't even have clothes to change into," I said. "I'm not trying to take advantage of you, but I can't manage these things on my own." Their reaction was harsh. They looked at me like I was nothing but a nuisance. My mother-in-law snapped, "We don't have that kind of money to spend on unnecessary helps." I couldn't argue with her anymore, so I decided to handle it myself. Thankfully, I had kept my freelance job, so I was able to pay for a housekeeper out of my own income. That's when Martha came into my life. Martha was a 50-year-old woman who had lost her husband many years ago and had no children. She reminded me of my late mother in some ways, kind, caring, and understanding. She helped me with everything I couldn't do on my own, and her gentle nature brought a sense of peace to my otherwise chaotic life. For the first time in a while, I felt a little bit of happiness. But of course, my in-laws didn't miss the chance to exploit the situation. As soon as Martha started working for me, they tried to get her to do their chores too. "Hey, do the laundry and cleaning for us as well," they demanded. Martha stood her ground. "No," she said firmly. "I'm here to take care of Emily, not the whole household." "What kind of housekeeper are you?" my mother-in-law snapped. "You're so arrogant." Martha didn't back down. "If you want me to do your part, it'll cost extra." "Are you willing to pay for it?" she replied calmly. This led to an argument, but secretly, I felt relieved. For once, someone had stood up to my in-laws and their unreasonable behavior. A year went by like this, with Martha and the helper being my only real companions. Then one day, my sister-in-law, Sarah, returned to the house. She had gotten divorced because her husband had cheated on her. "He's such an idiot," she said bitterly. "Some other woman must have seduced him. He was such a nagging pain anyway." Her husband had always seemed like a serious, faithful businessman to me, so I found her story strange. But I didn't want to cause any trouble, so I kept my thoughts to myself. Once Sarah moved back in, things got worse for me. She started behaving just like my in-laws, trying to make Martha do her chores. But Martha stood her ground again and refused. This didn't sit well with Sarah. "What are you even doing here? Just taking care of Emily? What a useless housekeeper for a useless woman," she said, mocking both of us. Sarah's sarcasm only added fuel to the fire. Now, my in-laws had someone else to gang up with. They'd constantly remind me how useless they thought I was. "You're just a bedridden wife taking up space," my father-in-law said. "Now that Sarah's back, this house feels cramped. We only need Sarah here." My mother-in-law chimed in. "You just lie in bed, drawing silly pictures. You're wasting time and space." Even when I tried to focus on my work, Sarah would go out of her way to come into my room just to criticize me. Her remarks were sharp and filled with sarcasm, and they cut deep. I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to talk to my husband about it. "Can you please tell your mom and Sarah to be a little more careful with their words?" I asked him. "They're constantly hurting me with their comments." But his response shattered me. "They're just telling the truth," he said bluntly.
"What do you mean by that?"
I asked, stunned. "Well, you can't even do your own housework," he replied. "All you do is lie in bed all day." "I'm not just lying here. I'm working," I protested. "I'm doing everything I can to contribute." "But you're working from bed," he said dismissively. "It's an easy job. You don't have to deal with commuting like I do." I tried to explain. "I'm doing my best to be useful to everyone. I'm trying so hard." "Maybe," he said coldly, "but the family isn't happy with you because you can't take care of the house. It's no wonder they think you're useless." His words crushed me. "Do you really think that too?" I asked quietly. "Don't be so sensitive," he replied. "Just deal with it. You can't survive if you let every little thing bother you." That conversation made it clear. My husband didn't care about me anymore. He wasn't supportive at all. I understood that my condition brought inconveniences, but I had hoped he would at least try to understand my struggles. Instead, he treated me like I was the problem. Every day, I wished I could walk again. I wished I could go back to the way things were before the accident. But most of all, I wished that my husband would care for me, support me, and see how much I was trying to do despite my limitations. Instead, I was left feeling alone in a house full of people who saw me as nothing more than a burden. How painful and heartbreaking my situation is. I feel such deep sadness, but then I wonder, am I being selfish for feeling this way? Am I asking for too much just to want someone to care for me? These thoughts make me try to hold back my tears, but sometimes, no matter how hard I try, they still fall. I remind myself that my accident left me with this body, but I've been doing everything I can to move forward. I refuse to let this defeat me. I push myself to keep going, telling myself that there are so many others in the world facing challenges even greater than mine. Still, I can't help but feel the loneliness, especially now when I have no parents to lean on during this difficult time. At the same time, I tell myself that maybe it's better this way. My parents don't have to witness what I'm going through. They don't have to see the pain or the struggles I endure every day. But that doesn't make the emptiness any easier to bear. With no one left in this house to truly stand by me, the misery only grows. I don't have a home to return to. I started wondering if it would be possible to leave this house and build a new life with my husband, somewhere far from all the negativity. But before I could even suggest it, my husband said something so cruel that it shook me to my core. At first, I thought he was thinking about my well-being, and for a brief moment, I felt happy that he cared. Then he said something that shattered my heart. "I think they're right," he said bluntly. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused and a little scared. "I think I'd be better off with a younger, healthier wife," he said casually, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "I want to have a child someday, but with you, it's just impossible." His words hit me like a blow to the head. My mind went blank, and for a moment, I couldn't process what he had just said. My own husband was telling me that he wanted to replace me because of my disability. I realized in that moment that I could no longer count on him for anything. He continued talking, but I couldn't hear anything else he said. The only thing I understood was that he wanted a divorce. His words echoed in my mind, tearing apart the little hope I had left. Then, my in-laws joined in with their insults. "You're useless. Just like a piece of trash," they sneered. "You may be paying for a housekeeper, but you barely make any money. After paying her, you'll have nothing left. You're just a burden to us, a parasite living off our house." They didn't stop there. "Even helpers don't work for free," they continued. "You're wasting money on them too. Just get out. We don't want you here anymore." I felt numb. There was no point in staying any longer after hearing such hateful words from the people I once considered family. I told myself that I had to leave. I didn't have a home to go back to, but I would find a new place to live, no matter what. I reached out to Martha, my housekeeper, and asked her to help me find a new place. She was more than happy to assist, and with everything now being so accessible online, it was easier than I thought to handle the process. Once all the paperwork was completed, I handed my husband the divorce papers. "Good," he said with a cold smile. "You finally made up your mind. But don't blame me. Blame yourself for being like this." His words were like knives, but I held my ground. "Are you sure you'll be okay without me?" I asked. "Of course," he replied confidently. "I'll find someone more suitable for me. Everyone says I deserve a better wife. Don't worry about us. We'll be fine." He went on to explain that they had enough money from his retirement and Sarah's divorce settlement to live comfortably for a while. "We don't need to depend on you anymore," he said. "Fine," I replied. "Do what you want." I didn't say anything else. I packed my things and moved out quietly. Although the experience was painful, there were some positive changes. I moved into a wheelchair-accessible apartment, which was a game changer. The space was designed with wide doorways so I could move around freely. The kitchen was large enough for me to cook my own meals, something I hadn't been able to do in years. It felt empowering to have a space that truly suited my needs. Martha continued to help me, but not as a housekeeper anymore. Instead, she became my business manager. I learned that before her marriage, Martha had been a successful businesswoman at a major company. She was incredibly tech-savvy and had no trouble managing my freelance work. She told me she left her high-powered job years ago because the intense competition in her corporate environment had worn her down. "I just had enough," she said with a laugh, "so I quit when I got married." I admired her strength and confidence. It made sense to me now why she was able to stand up to my in-laws without hesitation. Living on my own, I started to feel a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. I could hire help for cleaning, laundry, and shopping, which gave me the support I needed without relying on unkind family members. For the first time, I felt like I was in control of my life again. Just as I was beginning to settle into my new routine and feel hopeful about the future, life had more surprises in store for me. After my divorce, my ex-mother-in-law started calling me frequently. At first, I ignored her calls because I didn't see any reason to talk to her. There wasn't anything left to discuss, and honestly, I was enjoying my new life. Martha's support had been incredible, and without the constant drama of my in-laws, I was able to focus fully on my work. My business was thriving, and I simply didn't have the time or energy to deal with her. A year passed, and although I occasionally heard from Sarah, her calls had also become less frequent. My life had finally settled into a peaceful routine, and I decided it was time to deal with my ex-mother-in-law once and for all. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. "Hello," I said. "Finally. You've answered," she said, her tone immediately accusatory. "Why haven't you been answering my calls?" I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I was worried something had happened to you," she said, her voice suddenly soft and sweet, a tone I had never heard from her before when we lived together. Her sudden shift in demeanor made me suspicious. This wasn't the woman who had spent years criticizing me and calling me useless. I wondered if something had happened to her. Was she in trouble? Had she heard about my success? "Well," I said cautiously, "thank you for your concern, but I'm doing well. There's nothing for you to worry about." "Oh, that's good to hear," she said, though her voice sounded hesitant. Then she continued, "By the way, Paul and I were thinking maybe you could come back and live with us like before." I froze. "Excuse me?" I asked, unsure if I had heard her correctly. "You can't be happy living all alone," she said. "I've been thinking a lot, and it wasn't right to leave someone with a physical disability on their own. Come back home, and we'll take good care of you. You won't have to worry about anything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same woman who had once called me a parasite and a burden. "I'm doing great on my own," I said firmly. "I have a helper who supports me with my chores, and Martha helps me manage my work. I don't need anyone to take care of me." There was a pause, and then she changed the subject. About your business. Is it true you're earning more than Mark?" Her question caught me off guard, but I answered truthfully. "Yes." By the time of the divorce, my income had increased significantly. "I'm earning close to $15,000 a month now." Her voice became nervous. "Mark mentioned it, but I didn't think it was true. Was your income covering our living expenses after your accident?" "Yes," I replied. "In the beginning, I was contributing most of the money. Mark's company wasn't doing well, and his salary had been cut. I offered to help because he didn't want to tell you or Paul. He was worried you'd be upset if you found out his pay had been reduced. But after 3 years, he seemed to forget that I was the one paying for most things." She didn't respond right away, so I continued. "Oh, and by the way, I know the real reason Sarah got divorced. It wasn't because her husband cheated on her, it was because of her." "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Her ex-husband contacted me," I explained. "He told me Sarah stole his money and claimed it was alimony. He's planning to take legal action against her to recover what she took, plus additional compensation." She was silent for a moment. I didn't know about that," she finally said. "Well, now you do," I said. "And I also know about Mark's situation. He fell for a girl from a hostess bar, didn't he? He probably wanted the divorce, so he could use my earnings to support her. But let me guess, she wasn't interested in him." He was just another cusmarker to her. How did you know about that? She asked, her voice rising in surprise. I know everything, I replied. I also know that Mark's company went bankrupt 6 months ago and that he's been unemployed ever since. He can't find a job he thinks is good enough for him, so now he's just sitting around, feeling sorry for himself. She didn't deny it. Yes, that's true, she admitted. And Sarah came back after her boyfriend dumped her, but she brought even more debts with her. Paul's retirement money is completely gone because of them. We're drowning in debt. I stayed quiet, letting her words sink in. Then she said something that truly shocked me. If you come back, everything will be all right, she said hopefully. I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
What do you mean by that?
I asked, genuinely confused. Well, if you come back, you can help us pay off the debts, she said matter-of-factly. You're doing so well now, aren't you? Her nerve stunned me. This was the same woman who had driven me out of her home, called me useless, and encouraged my husband to leave me. And now she thought I'd return to fix their financial mess? I don't think so, I said firmly. I've built a life for myself, and I'm not coming back. You'll have to figure things out on your own. Before she could say anything else, I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, trying to process everything she had said. It was amazing how much could change in a year, but their desperation didn't change the fact that they had treated me horribly. I was done with them, and I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their chaos. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Mark probably never imagined that his company would actually go bankrupt, but looking back, it seemed like something that could happen because of his carelessness. He was never one to plan ahead or think about consequences. When I heard what had happened, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for how things had turned out, and relief that I wasn't tied to him anymore. Lisa, my ex-mother-in-law, called me in tears one day. If I had known this would happen, I would have never let you and Mark get divorced, she said, her voice filled with regret. But it was clear that her regret wasn't about losing me as a family member. It was all about the money. That's all she cared about, and honestly, that was all she had ever cared about. Her words made it painfully obvious that her only concern was herself. Sarah, on the other hand, had completely given up on any form of responsibility. I don't feel like working right now, she told me during one of her rare calls. Apparently, she had become a couch potato, spending her days lying around, doing nothing, and gaining weight. The situation for my ex-in-laws had gone from bad to worse. They had sold their old house to pay off Sarah's debts, but the house didn't fetch much money. It was old and in poor condition, and the cost of clearing the land was deducted from the sale price. On top of that, the location wasn't desirable, so they got far less than they had hoped. Now, the four of them, Lisa, Paul, Mark, and Sarah, were crammed into a small, cheap one-room apartment, barely making ends meet. Lisa cried to me over the phone, complaining about how hard their lives had become. We're working part-time jobs from morning until night, and we're so exhausted, she said, her voice shaking. Then she added something that left me speechless. It's all your fault. If you had just answered my calls, none of this would have happened. We wouldn't have had to sell the house. What do you mean? I asked, genuinely confused. If you had known we were selling the house, you would have helped us, wouldn't you? You used to live there too, so surely you must feel some attachment to it. I laughed bitterly. Not at all, I replied. Huh, she stammered, clearly not expecting that response. I couldn't believe how self-centered she was being. Did she really think I'd feel some kind of obligation to help them after everything they'd done to me? I was so glad I had ignored her calls for as long as I had. Even if I had answered back then, there was no way I would have gone along with such a ridiculous request. Lisa continued her pleading. Oh, so Mark and Sarah are being parasites to us now, but we really need you. Please come back. You're the only one we can count on. Nope, I said firmly. I'm not family anymore. Don't rely on me. Don't say that, she cried. We're sorry for what we've done. I apologize, truly. Her sudden apology didn't move me at all. Instead, I felt a headache coming on. I decided it was time to give them an ultimatum and end the conversation for good. Lisa, the reason I picked up your call today is because I wanted to let you know something important, I said. What is it? She asked, her voice wary. I'm going to sue all of you, I said calmly.
What?
Why should we pay you? Mark didn't even cheat on you. He wasn't in a relationship with that girl from the hostess bar, she protested. It's not for cheating, I explained. It's for the mental anguish you caused me through years of verbal abuse. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then I added, I have recordings and video evidence of all the cruel things you, Paul, Mark, and Sarah said to me. Every insult, every degrading comment. I've kept it all. When I told her about the evidence, Lisa panicked.
What?
You recorded us, she stammered. Then, without another word, she abruptly hung up the phone. I figured she was afraid that continuing the conversation would make things worse for her. Perhaps she was finally starting to feel the weight of her guilt. I followed through on my promise and filed a request for compensation through my lawyer. Lisa tried to plead with me, tearfully begging me to drop the case. She and the rest of my ex-in-laws complained endlessly about their current situation, but I didn't care. There was no way I was going to back down. They had put me through so much pain, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. Meanwhile, my life continued to move forward in a positive direction. I had been asked to illustrate a picture book, a major step toward my dream of becoming a picture book author. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. So much had happened to me, and there were times when the pain felt overwhelming. But through it all, I learned to stay strong, live positively, and not take myself too seriously. I knew that my future was bright, and I was determined to make the most of it.